The most protected man in Iran woke up on February 28th believing he was untouchable. By noon he was dead, and the operation that killed him reveals something far more significant than a single assassination. It reveals that the architecture of secrecy that protected the Islamic Republic's leadership for 4 decades has completely collapsed. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei had survived countless threats over his 35 years as supreme leader. Assassination attempts, coup plots, internal power struggles. He built layers of protection that would make any head of state envious. Multiple residences, unpredictable movements, elite guard details, underground bunkers designed to survive nuclear attack, and above all, operational security so tight that even senior regime officials rarely knew his exact location. None of it mattered. The operation that killed him began not with missiles but with patience. For months before the strike, American and Israeli intelligence waged a shadow war that the Iranian regime never detected. They were not just watching, they were listening to everything. The breakthrough came from space. Low Earth orbit satellites operated by the US Space Force had been systematically intercepting Iranian communications for years. But in the months before the strike, a more aggressive approach began. American intelligence reportedly bombarded Iranian communication networks with disruption operations. Spam calls, system probes, online breaches. Each intrusion served a dual purpose. It degraded Iranian operational security while harvesting data about communication patterns, locations, and relationships. But signals intelligence alone could not complete the picture. Human assets filled the gaps. Israeli intelligence has spent decades cultivating sources inside Iran. Some were ideological opponents of the regime. Some were motivated by money. Some were compromised through blackmail or family pressure. The identities of these assets remain the most closely guarded secrets in the intelligence world. But their contributions were essential. They provided context that satellites could not capture. They confirmed which facilities were actually in use. They reported on security protocols, shift changes, and the internal politics that determined who would be present at which meetings. One source, according to intelligence officials speaking anonymously, had access to the supreme leader's scheduling apparatus. Not his daily movements, which were closely held, but the broader calendar of significant gatherings. This source flagged the Pasteur Street summit weeks before it occurred. That single piece of information allowed American and Israeli planners to position assets, finalize strike packages, and wait for confirmation that the target would be present. The Iranians thought their encrypted channels were secure. They were wrong. American signals intelligence had penetrated deep enough to map the daily patterns of the regime's most senior officials, where they traveled, when they met, what facilities they used, who they spoke with, and what they discussed. And critically, when the supreme leader would be in a position vulnerable enough to strike. Years of intercepts, months of analysis, weeks of planning, and then a single morning when everything converged. The vulnerability was a morning summit on Pasteur Street. Iranian leadership had developed a false sense of security about gatherings in central Tehran. The city itself was the protection. Millions of civilians, dense urban infrastructure, international observers, embassies. The assumption was that no adversary would risk striking the heart of the capital. The collateral damage would be catastrophic. The international backlash would be severe. Tehran was sanctuary. That assumption died on February 28th. American intelligence identified that top-tier Iranian commanders, security advisors, and political officials were converging on the heavily guarded Pasteur Street compound. The supreme leader would be present. So would Major General Mohammad Bagheri, head of the Revolutionary Guard. So would Ali Shamkhani, the top national security advisor. The entire operational leadership of the Islamic Republic would be gathered in one location at one time. The window was narrow. The opportunity was unprecedented. The decision was made within hours of final confirmation. What followed was the largest Israeli military operation in history. Approximately 200 fighter jets launched from Israeli air bases, supported by aerial refueling tankers that allowed them to fly the 1,500 kilometers to Tehran and back. But before a single Israeli aircraft entered Iranian airspace, American forces had already begun the operation. Tomahawk cruise missiles launched from US Navy vessels struck first. Their targets were not leadership compounds. They were the air defense systems protecting Tehran. The Bavar 373 missiles, the radar installations scattered across the city, the integrated defense network that was supposed to make Iranian airspace impenetrable. Within minutes, the eyes and teeth of Iranian air defense went dark. The Israeli armada followed through the gap. The strike on Khamenei's compound was surgical in concept, but overwhelming in execution. Intelligence indicated the supreme leader was in an underground facility beneath the compound, but they could not be certain which level he occupied. The compound contained multiple bunkers at varying depths. The deepest would have required specialized American munitions to penetrate. The shallower facilities were vulnerable to Israeli bunker busters. They took no chances. 30 heavy munitions dropped directly onto the compound, GPS-guided bombs designed to penetrate earth and reinforced concrete before detonating. Each bomb displaced material as it traveled downward, creating a path for the explosion to reach underground structures that surface weapons could never touch. The physics of bunker busters is elegant in its brutality. The weapon's casing is made from artillery barrel steel, narrow and incredibly strong. The small cross-sectional area means the bomb displaces less material as it penetrates, allowing it to travel deeper before detonating. The warhead contains tritonal explosive, a mixture of TNT and aluminum powder that generates enormous destructive force in confined spaces. Delayed fuses allow the bomb to punch through multiple floors of concrete before exploding, ensuring the blast occurs at the target depth rather than on the surface. A single bunker buster can penetrate up to 6 meters of reinforced concrete or 30 meters of earth. 30 of them, dropped in sequence on the same compound, created a cascading collapse that no underground structure could survive. The first bombs opened paths. The following bombs traveled deeper. The final bombs detonated at depths that turned the entire subsurface into rubble. The cumulative effect was total structural collapse. Every level of the underground facility pancaked into the one below it. Anyone inside at any depth died instantly or was buried under tons of rubble. Khamenei was in one of the shallower bunkers. Intelligence sources later revealed this was a critical tactical error by his security team. Had he been positioned in the deepest maximum security facility, he might have survived. The Israeli munitions could penetrate deep, but the heaviest bunkers would have required American ordnance that was not deployed in the initial strike. His protectors chose the wrong room. That choice killed him. He was not the only casualty. The strike eliminated the entire senior leadership that had gathered for the morning summit. Bagheri, Shamkhani, multiple senior Revolutionary Guard commanders, and tragically several of Khamenei's family members who were present in the compound. But the Pasteur Street strike was only the anchor of a much larger operation. While the dedicated squadron delivered bunker busters to the leadership compound, the rest of the Israeli armada struck targets across Iran simultaneously. Approximately 500 additional targets in the first wave alone: air defense installations, ballistic missile silos, command and control facilities, communications infrastructure. The goal was not just to kill the supreme leader, it was to blind and paralyze the entire Iranian military apparatus in a single overwhelming blow. By the time Iranian forces understood what was happening, it was already over. Their radars were destroyed, their missiles were in silos that had been cratered, their communication networks were compromised or jammed. Their supreme leader was dead. Their senior military leadership was dead. The chain of command that had functioned for decades simply ceased to exist. US Central Command later confirmed that American and Israeli forces struck approximately 2,900 targets across Iran in a single day. The scale was unprecedented. Nothing like it had been attempted since the opening hours of the Iraq invasion in 2003. And unlike Iraq, this operation achieved its primary objective within hours. The decapitation was complete before most Iranians even understood their country was under attack. The intelligence work that made this possible represents a generational achievement in espionage. The combination of signals intelligence from space-based platforms, cyber operations that penetrated Iranian networks, and human assets within the regime created a picture of Iranian leadership movements that the targets themselves did not possess. Khamenei's security team did not know they were being watched. They did not know their communications were compromised. They did not know that every pattern, every routine, every vulnerability had been mapped and catalogued. They learned the truth at 8:47 in the morning when the first bombs fell. The implications extend far beyond this single operation. Every protected leader in the world is now reconsidering their assumptions about security. Underground bunkers that seemed impervious can be collapsed. Communication systems that seemed encrypted can be penetrated. Movement patterns that seemed unpredictable can be mapped by persistent surveillance from space. The technology that killed Khamenei is not secret. Bunker buster munitions have existed for decades. Satellite surveillance is well understood. Signals intelligence is a known capability. What was demonstrated on February 28th was not new technology. It was the integration of existing capabilities into a seamless operational picture that left no room for the target to escape. Iran built its leadership protection around assumptions that no longer hold. Urban density would deter strikes. Bunkers would survive bombardment. Communications would remain secure. Patterns could be varied enough to prevent targeting. Each assumption failed, and the supreme leader paid for those failures with his life. The man who controlled Iran for 35 years died because his enemies were more patient, more technologically sophisticated, and more willing to accept risk than his security planners imagined possible. Somewhere in the rubble of Pasteur Street, buried under concrete and earth, lies the answer to a question that intelligence services have asked for decades. How do you kill someone who has built their entire existence around being unkillable? The answer, it turns out, is time, technology, and the willingness to strike when the window opens. The window opened on February 28th. It closed 30 seconds later, and by then it was already too late. The bunker that was supposed to guarantee survival became a tomb. The communications that were supposed to be unbreakable became a map. The security apparatus that was supposed to be impenetrable became irrelevant. 35 years of building walls. One morning of watching them fall. This is what the end of untouchability looks like, and every protected leader on Earth is now wondering if they could be next.